So I have the extreme honor of introducing our keynote speaker. Elie Mystal is the justice correspondent for The Nation, where he writes about politics and social and racial justice. Elie's first book, Allow Me to Retort, A Black Guy's Guide to the Constitution, was on the New York Times bestseller list in April 2022. His next book, Bad Law, 10 Popular Laws That Are Ruining America, is due out, or is due out, scratch that, was published in March of 2025. Mystal was executive editor of Above the Law, a website with around 2 million unique visitors that focuses on law, courts, and justice. He's known for writing about the law and politics, breaking down Supreme Court decisions, and up-to-the-minute coverage of Supreme Court confirmation battles. Off the page, Mystal is a legal contributor to the More Perfect podcast, a Radiolab spinoff on WNYC. He appeared regularly on MSNBC since 2018, appearing on All In with Chris Hayes, The Beat with Ari Melber, AM Joy with Joy Reid, and Up with David Gora. On the radio, Mystal has been a frequent guest on The Brian Lair Show, The Dean Obadella Show, and Signal Boost with Zerlina Maxwell. He's also appeared on The Mike Huckabee Show, The Megyn Kelly Show, Red Eye with Greg Gutfeld, and has done various appearances on CNBC and Fox Business about legal industry news. Mystal received his undergraduate degree in government from Harvard University and his JD from Harvard Law School, and worked as an associate at Debevoise and Plimpton from 2003 to 2005. And again, it is my extreme pleasure to introduce Elie Mystal.
Thank you so much, Adizah. Thank you so much, everybody, for having me. As Adizah said, my name is, in fact, Elie Mystal. I am, in fact, the justice correspondent for The Nation magazine, though these days it feels more like I'm the injustice correspondent, since I spend most of my time explaining how the government is breaking the law and how the law will not stop them. I am a large black man, too fat to protest when people say, "Yo, big man," but not nearly jolly enough to enjoy it. I'm not nearly light-skinned enough to pass, but I'm not so dark-skinned that I really suffer from the worst effects of colorism. I wear glasses to make myself look more serious than I actually am, but most people who are not cops will say that my most distinctive feature is my natural afro. It is long, it is poofy, and it is completely gray. My wife says that my size, demeanor, and hair all give the impression of me being an angry storm cloud when I get rolling. I'm wearing a gray sports coat and a blue shirt to complete that effect today. Enough about me. I am here to talk about the threats to our democracy and our multi-ethnic society led by the United States government against its people. These threats are coming through both legal and illegal means. They're both subtle and insidious, but also overt and violent. They're predicated on the belief that white men, and white men only, have the right to rule. The people running this country believe that they should be living in a white ethno-state, and that anybody who challenges the white man's preferences, whether those challenges come through protesting, voting, or even merely existing, that they are presumptively illegitimate, and those people should be removed from the political discussion, if not the country itself. And these threats are nothing new. That is one of the key takeaways I want people to understand about this current moment. Nothing we're seeing from the Donald Trump administration or the MAGA movement more generally is new. As they say in Battlestar Galactica, this has all happened before, and it will all happen again. The people currently running this country represent an unbroken line of white men who have never for a day accepted the premise of a multi-ethnic, multiracial society based on freedom and equality for all. That is a premise these people rejected on day one of the founding of this country. As most people are aware, we are currently being bombarded with reminders that America is celebrating the 250th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence. In reality, we're being asked to celebrate the 250th anniversary. We're being asked to celebrate the 250th anniversary of the Declaration of White Male Independence, because the Declaration stood for nothing else. The Declaration famously says, "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal." The use of the word men was not an oversight. Thomas Jefferson didn't mean it in the non-gendered sense of humankind that we sometimes now graft onto the word. Jefferson, and everybody who signed it, who were all men, by the way, meant men. Men were equal. Women were not. That is what they said, and that is how they acted. In the famous line that Jefferson was only talking about white men was so obvious to the people of his time that Jefferson didn't even need to spell it out. The white could remain silent because everybody reading the document knew who he was talking about. The native man, whose land Jefferson and his colonial cabal was in the process of stealing. They were self-evidently not to be considered the equals of the white man. The Africans Jefferson and his cohort were actively enslaving and raping were not to be considered the equals of white men either. The Declaration of Independence was really just a white man's FUBU. It only contemplated an America for us, by us. And the us was always only supposed to be fellow wealthy white men. When the group of founding white men finally got around to writing a constitution, their goal was to create a Western slaver's paradise based on forced labor, rape, and the protection of the bourgeoisie middle class. Sorry, the bourgeoisie merchant class. I wish it was about even the middle class, but it wasn't. It was just about the wealthy elites. And the important thing to understand here is that while the framers of the Constitution, they did not miss. They accomplished what they set out to accomplish. They wrote into existence a system that guaranteed a form of Republican self-government for wealthy elites and endless subjugation for women and Black people, reforming the country into something that at least allows for the possibility of a multiracial polity. That didn't happen through winning elections, folks. Frederick Douglass wasn't out here telling enslaved Black folks, well, you just got to vote harder. Changing the white man's constitution required a bloody civil war where 750,000 people died. And even then, the winners of that war tried to change as little as possible. So much so that it took another 100 years after the war for America to become anything more than a white ethno-state based on apartheid. So, yeah, Donald Trump ain't new, folks. He's not even unusual. He's just a rich white man who wants what rich white men have mostly wanted at every point in American history. He's just more crass and less intellectually polished than most of his racist ancestors and brethren. The goals of the white ethnostatists have always been most obvious in the realm of voting rights. While whites have always been a majority in this country, though they will not always be a majority in this country, and perhaps we can talk later about why that freaks them out so very much, the white ruling class has always been, the white ruling class of again, elite merchants and businessmen, they've always been relatively small. The ruling class of people who walk around thinking that they literally own this place have always been small, and what they want has always been relatively unpopular. To hold political control in their so-called democratic republic, they've always needed to do one thing: prevent everybody from voting and prevent everybody's votes from counting equally. That is and has always been their key. Because in a true republic, based on the principle of one person, one vote, these people would lose. These people would lose every time, and they know it. That is why they've used every constitutional and legal trick in the book to prevent everybody from voting and preventing all those votes from having equal weight. The first and most obvious trick is in the Constitution itself, which is silent on the right to vote. You can read the original Constitution and all 27 amendments to it, and you will not find a positive right to vote because it ain't in there. Instead, what you find is a number of negative clauses. The right to vote cannot be abridged on account of this or that. The 15th and the 19th Amendments prevent the denial of voting rights based on race or gender. The 24th Amendment prevents the denial of voting rights based on a poll tax. The 26th Amendment prevents the denial of voting rights based on being over for people who are over the age of 18. But nowhere does the document say that you or anybody else has a positive right to vote. And nowhere does it say that all votes must be given equal political weight. Again, that's not an oversight, and that's not an accident. Think of it this way. If I want to vote, but I can't, I have to prove that somebody actively prevented me from doing so on account of my race or gender. It's not enough for me to say, I tried to vote, but I couldn't, because I don't actually have a positive right to vote. And because of this, the government is free to make voting as hard as possible for me, so long it doesn't actively deny me the right to vote on account of my race. If I had a positive right to vote, any impediment to my voting is potentially a constitutional violation of my rights. But since I don't actually have a right to vote, well, I can stand my black ass in line for 3 hours and like it for all the Constitution cares. I can have my vote thrown out or not counted at all if I vote at the wrong polling station. And the right polling station, that doesn't have to be anywhere near my house. If ICE thugs with guns want to follow me from my house up to, I think, 10 feet in front of the polling station, guess what? Unless I can prove that they're doing it on account of my race and that their intimidation is preventing me from exercising a right to vote, I'm constitutionally SOL, out of luck. The lack of a positive right to vote becomes all the more anti-democratic when you consider there's no constitutional provision mandating that all votes are counted equally. Again, there's no mystery here as to why no such provision exists. The principle of one person, one vote literally destroys the structure of the Constitution, because that principle would destroy the structure of the Senate and the Electoral College. The Senate, as everybody should know, is the most anti-democratic institution to ever fall out the mouths of people who say that they are running a democracy. It gives voting rights to land, not people. Because each state gets equal representation in the Senate, it means that people in low population states have more voting power, literally more power per vote than people in high population states. The Senate literally makes some votes count more than other votes. And that problem is exacerbated by the Electoral College, which is how we choose the president. The president is the only elected official who is supposed to be chosen by the whole country. And yet, once again, people's votes do not count equally. A voter in Wyoming, our least populous state, has somewhere around 400% more voting power than a person in California. So if you think about Coach Phil Jackson, right? When he goes home to Wyoming and he lives as a hippie and he's like up in the mountains in Birkenstocks with goats, he's got 4 times more voting power than when he's coaching the Los Angeles Lakers. As a quick aside here, I want to address one of the more common defenses of the Senate and the Electoral College. The defenders of these anti-democratic institutions will often say that they are necessary. They are a necessary evil to protect rural voters from being run over by people living in big cities. That defense fails its first contact with reality. The Senate and the Electoral College don't actually transfer power from the cities to the rural areas. They transfer power to people living in the cities in low population states. I'm from New York, but I happen to be in Georgia right now for a friend's birthday party. Now, Georgia is a state with a ton of rural areas, right? Like real country areas. Like I can go out someplace in this state and find brothers who are still waiting for their 40 acres and a mule kind of rural areas, right? Of course, I ain't in one of those parts. I'm in Atlanta. And the reason Georgia has gone from red to purple is because cities like Atlanta, Macon, Athens, these cities are getting big enough to totally overpower the rural areas of the state of Georgia. In other states, that split is even more obvious. You win Arizona by winning Phoenix and Tucson and Scottsdale, maybe. You win Iowa by winning Des Moines and maybe Cedar Rapids. You win Rhode Island by winning Providence. The Electoral College and the Senate do not give power to rural people. They give power to generally business class people who are congregating in the cities, with rural communities only mattering in these states if the city turnout is unusually low. You can check the tape on, go out and try to win Nebraska, right? Just go try to win Nebraska without winning Omaha or Lincoln and tell me how that works out for you. And when you realize that you can't win Nebraska without winning Omaha and Lincoln, you realize that that Warren Buffett eating a steak and people who work for him have way more power in rural Nebraska than people actually living on a farm in Nebraska. In any event, the anti-democratic structure of the Senate and the Electoral College is therefore not here to protect rural voters from democracy based on the one person, one vote theory. These institutions were put into the Constitution for one reason and one reason only, and that is to protect slavery. The rural voters argument is just a false flag designed to hide the slavers' reasons behind those institutions. But there is another reason the Senate and the Electoral College, and to some extent even the House of Representatives, serve the white supremacist project that underlie their origins even today. And it's a reason most people don't actually think about when contemplating the anti-democratic structure of the Constitution. It's the winner-take-all system. If I win a state with 50% plus one vote, I win the whole thing. There's no acknowledgement that half the state voted against me or my party. 50% plus one vote equals 100% of the political power. Folks, that's ass backwards. A representative government should represent all the voters, the winners and the losers, in proportion to the amount of votes that were cast. Winner-take-all systems lead to an overrepresentation of the majority and a severe underrepresentation of the minority. And again, That works great if what you're really trying to do is build a white ethno-state in a country that is majority white. But it is a ridiculous system if you were trying to run a multi-ethnic, multiracial polity based on a representative form of government. Indeed, it is so ridiculous that most other advanced democracies do not run on a winner-take-all system because it's stupid. Most other advanced democracies support far more than two parties because in a representative parliamentary system, there is space for minority parties with minority viewpoints. And the majority party, even in victory, in a representative government system, usually has to form some kind of coalition government with other parties and other viewpoints in order to form a government. Not here. As long as whites stick together, they can have anything they want. Again, the Constitution at a structural level is not concerned with minority viewpoints. It's concerned with making sure the ruling class has as many levers as possible so as they never lose control. And that is why the constitutional founders never put in any restrictions on political parties. They didn't think there would be political parties. They thought that the rich white men would always vote as rich white men and would always stick together. And so they were much more worried about geographical factions, factionalism between different regions of the countries, because the idea that one rich banker in New York would be very different from another rich banker in New Jersey simply never occurred to them. And since only the rich bankers were going to get to vote, what did it matter what anybody else thought? That is why the Constitution is concerned with stopping geographical factionalism and not party factionalism. And as we all know, geographical factionalism is just a very nice euphemism for slavery, because that is what the geographic factions were actually fighting about. That is also why the Constitution has no rules against gerrymandering. Literally none whatsoever. The Constitution allows the rulers to pick their voters instead of allowing the voters to pick their rulers. Without a positive right to vote, the constitutional mandate that without the constitutional right to vote and without a constitutional mandate that all votes are created equal, it is entirely constitutionally permissible for the government to gerrymander away the political power of entire groups of people. And according to Chief Justice John Roberts and his Republican-controlled Supreme Court, even the constitutional prohibitions on taking away the right to vote based on race are inapplicable unless the gerrymanderer literally says, no, I drew this map because I hate black folks. You can imagine how often that happens. In case after case, the Supreme Court has ignored obvious racism in gerrymandered maps because the map makers claim, I don't have a racist bone in my body. For this Supreme Court, that's enough. That's all you have to say to make the 15th Amendment not even exist. As long as the white gerrymanderers super double promise that they're not being racist, the Supreme Court will suborn racism. Now, people often defend our anti-democratic, white supremacist Constitution by saying that its failure to protect voting rights is not a holdover from slavery, but rather a commitment to federalism. That always makes me laugh because, how can your response to your Constitution is racist? How can the response to that be, oh, but states' rights? In 2026, you're telling me states' rights is the thing that's not, it's just, but that's what they say. That is what they say. Nonetheless, yes, the Constitution operates under the idea of federalism, which presumes that laws, rights, and responsibilities do not flow down from a centralized government, but instead matriculate up from the individual states. The federal constitution does not speak to voting rights because those rights are not for the federal government to give. It is the states, each in their own diverse individual capacity, which are best suited to determine who should vote and who should not. I don't have to tell you how this division of voting rights labor helps whites in their pursuit of anti democratic control over Black people. It is self evident, if you will, to say why Virginia preferred a system where it could decide for itself who should have the right to vote without interference from the federal government, which might be influenced by New Yorkers and people in big cities and so on. What's perhaps less obvious, though, is how situating voting rights in the states, as opposed to the federal government, still helps the white supremacists today. The key problem here is friction. Friction in order to vote. It means, look, for the sake of the argument, let's say I am an expert on voting rights, right? Let's say I'm a literal expert on the matter. And despite that, I cannot tell you what you need to do in order to vote. Not without asking some more questions, right? I need to at least first know where you live before I can give you any expert information about what you have to do to vote. And depending on where you live, there might be rules or requirements or timelines that I know about, not if I was an expert in voting rights, but now I have to be an expert in voting rights in your particular state. And I have to keep those expertise fresh because Lord knows the rules might change every 2 or 4 years. The rules that I learned about in school about your state might be totally different than the rules of your state as they are applied today. God forbid you move, right? If you move across state lines or maybe even into a different county in your state, I got to know more. I got to know, in order to help you to vote, I got to have to know about your residency requirements for when registration happens in the new county that you are now living in, to even be able to tell you what you have to do in order to register to vote. And you need to ask an Uber driver where you're supposed to vote, right? And again, I'm pretty knowledgeable about this. In my own town, right? I live in Mount Vernon, New York. In my own town, on any given election day, I don't know where to go. I got to look it up every time. There are only two polling places in my town. It's either the elementary school down the street or the high school about 5 minutes away from my house. But it changes all the time. To this time you're voting at the high school. This time you're voting at the elementary school. I voted at the elementary school for the presidential election. Surely I said, no, this time it's the high school. My town, one town. And again, I pay a lot of attention to this. All of that complication and friction benefits one group of people: high information, bourgeoisie homeowners with 30-year mortgages who ain't going anywhere, right? As I just said, as a guy with a 30-year mortgage, I might not know where to vote, but I know it's one of two places, right? And I have learned the hard way that it's one of two places: renters, transients, college students, hourly wage earners, people who only pay attention at the last minute voters, right? All of this is done to make it harder for those people to vote. But old people who are financially secure enough to be stable in their homes, they have an inherent voting advantage over everybody else. Their votes don't directly count more than yours. The system just makes it a lot easier for them to exercise their vote. That is why I have long advocated for a national voting system. Like nearly every other large advanced democracy, we should have one system to elect our national and federal leaders, not 50 different systems. You know who agrees with me now? It's not Hakeem Jeffries. And it's not Gavin Newsom. It's Donald Trump. It's Donald Trump now agrees with me. He is literally he's literally right now the leading advocate for a nationalized election system and overcoming states' rights in the election sphere to do it. I can kind of file that under be very, very careful what you wish for. Obviously, Trump wants to nationalize the election in order to rig it. The Save America Act, which has been described by lawyer Mark Elias, as the most dangerous threat to voting rights Congress has ever passed. And he's not wrong. The Save America Act, which is what Donald Trump is demanding the Republicans pass, even though the Democrats are threatening to filibuster it, this would require an ID to vote, like real voter ID, and proof of citizenship in order to vote. Trump also wants to functionally ban mail-in balloting, and he wants federal control over the voter registration rolls in each state, giving his centralized government the power to purge people out of their state voting rolls for the most part without them even knowing, right? So you think you're registered, but Trump purged you, so you show up to your polling place once you figure out where that is on election day, only to find out that you're not registered and you had to register 3 weeks ago to vote in that election. The SAVE Act is a terrible piece of legislation designed to take advantage of all of the constitutional loopholes I explained earlier in order to suppress the voting rights of non-white people. I believe that the Democrats should do everything in their power to stop the SAVE Act from happening unless the Republicans are willing to make a trade. Hear me out here, because I'm about to say something really controversial, and I just want to give everybody a trigger warning that I'm about to go like way beyond the pale, so just get your heads right. I'm about to say something non-standard, but trust me here. If you really want to fix voting rights for future generations, there is a trade that would lead to some short-term pain that is worth considering right now. If Trump and MAGA want all the terrible things they want from the SAVE Act, and they're willing to do it in exchange, all right, in exchange for nationalized automatic voter registration and national automatic voter portability, I'm taking that deal. I wrote about this in my book, Bad Law, which I believe is available for some of you right now. So I'm giving you the short version of the argument, but that short argument is automatic voter registration changes the entire game. Voter registration laws, voter pre-registration laws, literally all of them are a voter suppression technique. And it's a technique that's not actually inherent to the Constitution as written. There is no voter registration requirement written into the Constitution, and there were no voter registration laws at the founding of the country. Voter registration, the pre-registration that you have to register weeks or months before you're allowed to vote. Voter registration laws popped up later, much later in this country's history, only after the Civil War. And they popped out as a way to discourage immigrants and newly freed Black people from voting in northern states. That's where these laws, all these voter registration laws, first came from. It was freed Blacks migrating from the South to the North, and the Northerners were like, whoa, we freed y'all. We didn't want y'all coming here to vote. Ain't nobody invited you to Chicago to vote. And so that's when they came up with all of these voter pre-registration laws. Prior to the Great Migration, prior to the post-Reconstruction period, nobody had to pre-register to vote. People just showed up and voted, usually with that ID. Voter participation among eligible voters has never been as high as it was in the late 19th century before voter registration laws hit the books. I believe that participation would go up again, even with a voter ID requirement, if people no longer had to pre-register to vote. And it would certainly happen since automatic registration would carry with it the implicit promise of voter portability. Portability means you should be automatically registered wherever you happen to live, and that registration should follow you whenever you move. So if you move from one state to another, You don't have to re-register. You're just automatically registered in your new state. If you move from one county to another within your state, again, the registration just follows you, right? I live in New York. In New York City, if you move from apartment A to apartment B in your same building, you technically have to re-register to vote. And if you don't, you technically are ineligible to vote in an election. That's not how it should be. If you vote and if you move in within your state, it should be incumbent on the state to follow you, to have your registration follow you around. And that should go for polling places as well. You show up to a polling place, you plop down your ballot. It's on this, it should be up to the state to figure out where that ballot is supposed to go. It's incumbent on the government to get your vote to the right locale, not incumbent upon you to magically know which high school you're supposed to go to. If you give me this, if you give me all the benefits that I'm talking about from automatic and portable registration, I will eat voter ID. I really will. And I say that knowing full well that voter ID requirements are a secret poll tax. I know full well that they're aimed at discouraging poor people from voting. I know full well that voter ID requirements make it harder for Native Americans to vote, and that one of the real twists of the knife with voter ID is that it makes it extremely hard for married women to vote. Married women who have changed their name, and thus their voter ID does not match their birth certificate ID, or whatever the hell else Trump is trying to come up with. I get how bad voter ID requirements are given the current government running it. And I'm saying it's worth it to make the trade anyway. The long-term gains of automatic registration and portability are actually worth it. And if you don't believe me, if you think my deal is giving away the store, it's giving away too much, I have a challenge for you. Offer it to a Republican, because they'll say no. As much as they claim they want voter ID, they wouldn't trade it away. They wouldn't trade away the complicated, nonsensical voter pre-registration systems. Republicans would rather have the current system, which they claim is rife with fraud and abuse, than my system, which would give them the ID requirement that they say makes the fraud go away, which of course it does because there is no fraud because they invented it, but makes it easier with their precious, oh, this is important voter ID to actually vote. Mike Johnson wouldn't take my deal, even though my deal is giving Mike Johnson exactly what he says he wants. That's how you know that getting rid of voter registration is the bigger goal here than even losing on voter ID. All right, with the time I have left, let me come back to the fold. And let me talk about the thing that I would not trade away in order to get automatic registration. And that is birthright citizenship. Birthright citizenship is one of the two things my people won in the Civil War, right? Most people understand the first thing, the 13th Amendment and the abolition of slavery. For the purposes of this talk, I'm going to gloss over the caveat in the 13th Amendment, which allows slavery as a punishment for crime. I'm not going to get into that, but I always want to acknowledge that the 13th Amendment has a poison pill in the middle of it. As a Black man who can trace at least part of their ancestry to a slave who was freed when Sherman came marching on through Mississippi, a lot of people don't understand how birthright citizenship was also something that my Black ass won in the Civil War. That's because they think of birthright citizenship as something that's only useful to immigrants and their children and people who weren't born here who want their children to have the full benefits of American citizenship. But birthright citizenship is not just for immigrants. Indeed, birthright citizenship is why Black people are allowed to be citizens at all. Birthright citizenship created the concept of what we call an American citizen in the first place. As I explained earlier, the Constitution is based on the concept of federalism, the idea that rights flow up from the states. Those rights didn't just apply to voting, they applied to citizenship as well. At the founding, there was no such thing as an American citizen. An American citizen would have sounded weird to them. There were only citizens of their respective states. So you were a citizen of Virginia, you were a citizen of New York, and your rights and responsibilities flowed from that designation. I am a New York citizen. I have certain rights. I am a Virginian citizen. I have different rights. There was nothing, there was no Uber United States citizen because that term didn't exist. Again, obviously, you can see why the white supremacists running the joint really liked that system. It meant that Virginia could choose for itself who got to be a citizen and who didn't. And New York could make a different distinction. I don't have to explain to you that Virginia thought black people could definitely super not be citizens. And because of federalism, there was no higher political entity for black people in Virginia to appeal to, right? When Thomas Jefferson comes into your hut to rape you, you can't say, no, actually, sir, you can't rape me. I am a citizen of the United States of America. Jefferson would just say, well, you're in Virginia now. The Dred Scott decision, and for those who don't know, the Dred Scott decision involved a slave being taken to a free state, arguing he was a citizen of that free state, which he was, and thus could not be sent back into bondage. That was the Dred Scott decision, and he lost. He lost hard. Roger Taney, the Chief Justice at the time, literally tells this man, a black man has no rights that a white man is bound to respect. It turned out, thanks to the Dred Scott decision, that not only could the states choose for themselves who got to be a citizen and who didn't, but it turned out your citizenship status could be taken away, could be changed based on what state you happen to be in. And that once you lost your citizenship because you traveled to the wrong side of the tracks, you traveled across state lines, you could never get it back. It was gone forever. That situation, in addition to being immoral and evil and disgusting, was impractical. It's one of the reasons the Dred Scott decision is a precursor to the Civil War, because you simply can't run a polity where citizenship status changes wildly based on where you happen to be if you're all supposed to be in the same country. It is the 14th Amendment's birthright citizenship clause that changed all of that. It's the 14th Amendment and the birthright citizenship clause that created what we now consider the status of a citizen of the United States of America. That is literally where that comes from. It doesn't come from the Constitution. It doesn't come from the Declaration. It doesn't come from the founding. It comes from the 14th Amendment's birthright citizenship clause after the Civil War. So Trump's administration's attempt to take this away should not just be understood as another one of its disgusting and bigoted attacks on immigrants, even though, of course, it is another disgusting and bigoted attack on immigrants. It must also be understood as an attempt to literally bring us back to a pre-Civil War footing where citizenship and rights and the rights associated with citizenship can change wildly depending on where you are. And finally, there's another really good reason why the United States went with a birthright approach, which is different than what the European countries do. Indeed, all of the New World countries, Haiti, Cuba, Brazil, all of the New World countries adopted a birthright citizenship methodology as opposed to what they do in the Old World, in many places in the Old World, not just in Europe, but also in Asia and also in Africa. Where they do in the Old World is that citizenship comes through your lineage, comes through your parents. You are a citizen of where your parents are from, right? Why the Old World, New World difference? Why, right? Colonization, right? You're a white man living in London, and you go to stomp your feet around in India. You go to stomp your feet around in somebody else's country, and you have a child there. Do you want your child to be a citizen of India that you're in the process of subjugating? You're a Frenchman, you go to Vietnam to take some of their stuff. Do you want your child born in Vietnam to be a Vietnamese citizen? No, you want your child to be a French citizen. You want your child to be a British citizen. You want your child to be a citizen of where you are from, not where you are banging. Totally different than New World. Totally different than New World, because in the New World, we're like, well, we actually don't know where everybody's ancestor is from because the Portuguese didn't take good records, right? We don't actually know where everybody's from. Everybody's from somewhere. How about you're from here? The easiest, simplest, and most effective way to decide the question is you are from where you are born, right? And also, as opposed to the old world, it's also an anti-colonial idea, right? We are literally saying we reject the colonial perspective that you are a citizen of where your daddy is from, so that when your daddy comes here to take over our stuff, you're still no. If you're born here, you're part of here, you're gonna have to deal with being from here. That's actually birthright citizenship is actually an anti-colonial idea in response to the way that the colonial powers did citizenship. That's why it's here. And so when you go after it, you're going at something that underpins not just the entire United States of American experience, but you're going at something that underpins the entire experience of the Americas, the entire way that the Americas try to overcome its original sins of colonialism and bondage and slavery. That's why they're going for it. It's got everything to do with who you are as a person of color, not just who you are as an immigrant. And it's important for people to understand that. Yeah, I like to, it's time to close. And this is really how I want to close. I want people to understand that they should never treat the current white supremacist party as fundamentally different than the previous white supremacist party, right? People are, oh, these aren't your father republic. Yes, they are. Yes, it's one white supremacist party for all time, right? And I don't really give a damn what they call themselves today, right? Today, they happen to be calling themselves MAGA. If you go back to when my mom was born in 1950 in Mississippi, the white supremacist party called themselves Democrats, right? If you go back to 1930 in Germany, the white supremacist party called themselves Nazis. I don't care what they call themselves. Whoever the white supremacist party is now is the unbroken line of the white supremacist party. I don't give a damn what you name yourself, right? Never treat what the Trump administration is doing as if it is new. It is not new. These guys are not creative enough to come up with new. They have never had a new idea. All of their ideas are old. They've all been tried before, and they're all being pushed on us because these old ideas have very predictable results. But that is also our strength. Because they're running the same old plays, we already know how to stop them. The power of understanding the white supremacist playbook is that we've defeated the white supremacists before, and we can do it again and again and again, and as many times as we have to. We also know the play. We know that appeasement and pacification don't work, but resistance does. We know that economic boycotts hit these people where they live. We know that nonviolence works. And we know that nonviolence works not because we're scared, not because we don't want to get in a fight, but because we know it is the superior tactical tool to get us what we want. We know that there are more of us than there are of them. And we know that if we stick together, we are undefeated. Thank you so much for having me here today. I have talked for a bit. I look forward to shutting the hell up and potentially answering some of your questions. But thank you so much for having me.